basically, we covered chapter 1, and we were discussing the midwives and whether they were lying or not lying, whether lying is allowed.
Yeah. All right. So, but the basic idea is that and we talked about like there are two possibilities on the midwives, that Shifra and Puah. In other words, there are these midwives, and it just names two of them, of all of the midwives. It doesn't mean that there was only two midwives, but it gives the names of two. Possibly they were the leaders of like the guild or something. And we talked about the identity, were they Egyptian or Israelite. Now notice, let's see. And so the Lord built up their houses. And the rabbis say that means that, they married into Levites or Kohanim or into royalty, things like that. And let's see. So then Pharaoh gives the order to throw so at first with the midwives, it was kind of in secret. So the midwives could, when they were giving birth, they could make sure that the male baby died and just tell the parent, oh, sorry, your boy died. And, high infant mortality rate in the ancient world anyway, so they wouldn't be any the wiser. So he clearly doesn't want to give some kind of public decree in front of everybody. It's just quietly tells the midwives. And then when they give him the answer, and by the way, here's an interesting thing too, because the Pharaoh, the Midrash says that because the Pharaoh was deceitful in the way he was operating, that was a kind of midah keneged midah, we say, a measure for measure. So the midwives were deceitful to him. And so they're summoned before him. And so they tell him, well, the Israelite women, they give birth. They're much more vigorous. They give birth before we even get there. And so it's like deceit, midah keneged midah. And then finally, when you have the children being cast into the Nile, and so then later on, we're going to see that the Nile River will be used as a weapon against Egypt as well. And that also, the Midrash tells us, is a punishment, midah keneged midah. So the Nile, which is also worshipped as a deity in Egypt, is now going to be used, turned on Israel. So, all right, now let's turn to chapter 2. And why don't you start reading there?
Okay. A certain man of the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman. The woman...
Yeah, now notice how it doesn't give a name of the father or the mother here.
Right.
And which is... and why do you think that is, by the way?
No, that beats me. There are certain names in the scriptures that are being mentioned, and you wonder why are they just appear, and then they never mentioned again. And here you would want to know, and no, they're not.
It seems
maybe it's just a matter of focus on the story.
I think that that's a part of it. The focus is on Moshe. And I think it's also just to present him as an ordinary baby from an ordinary family. And I think that that's the idea. Nothing special, nothing divine, anything like that. Just an ordinary baby from an ordinary family. So, okay, go ahead. Continue.
The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw how beautiful he was, she hid him for 3 months.
Yeah, no, we don't even know this also. You can learn how Hebrew narrative is written. It's not till much later in the narrative that we learn that he's not even the firstborn.
No.
You would think he was from reading this, but later on we learn he's got an older sister and an older brother. And okay, so she hides him for 3 months, and it's like, no, unfortunately, the Gestapo is going to find him.
Yeah.
So she's got to leave him in God's hands.
And I know.
And by the way, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Now I know we say it often. This is not a Hebrew class, but I like that what here is translated as beautiful. Of course, in the Hebrew is tov.
Yeah.
And she saw that he was tov. Sort of echoing almost here already echoing, of course, the language, the creation language. God seeing that his creation was tov, and it was. And I understand the translation, beautiful. I think it's a good translation, but it loses that little.
Sure. And by the way, there's a beautiful midrash on the end of chapter 1 that I forgot to mention. And that is Moshe's father, Yitro, says after that decree is issued, he says, well, if that's the way it's going to be, then it's better to just not have children at all. And then according to Midrash, Miriam says, Abba, your decree is worse than Pharaoh's, because Pharaoh's decree destroyed half of the new children. Your decree destroys all of the children.
Right.
And that encouraged him to go ahead and have Moshe.
Right.
Which is interesting.
And which reminds me of comments that I've heard from Jews saying after the Holocaust, the biggest victory for the Jews and the biggest defeat for Hitler is that we are still around.
Yeah, that's
that
right.
We are alive. And yeah, that is of course the Jewish people survives. And and has survived miraculously for so many years in spite of everything. And here's where it starts, this suppression and oppression. And so interesting.
So all right. And so now let's go ahead into verse 3.
When she could hide him no longer, she got a wicker basket for him and caulked it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child into it and placed it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile.
Yes. Okay. Now, teva is the term for ark here, and it occurs only 2 times in the whole Torah. Here and in Pashat Noach.
Yeah.
All right. So this is the same term used for Noah's Ark. And similarly, she covers it with bitumen and pitch. These are the same terms that are used of covering Noah's Ark. And so you cover it with stuff like that to make a watertight seal for your boat. And so, and as you pointed out already, the word for beautiful is tov, actually, which is the same word that goes back to creation in Genesis 1. So, just as Noah's flood parallels the creation, it's a kind of uncreation, recreation.
Yeah.
In Noah's flood. So this is paralleling that. And, after Noah's flood ends, and they come out of the ark and whatever, people go back to, God says he will no longer destroy the world by water. And, but sin still, God's creation still gets messed up from Noah on to Migdal Bavel, right, to the Tower of Babel. And the mitigation there, right after Genesis 11 and the Tower of Babel, is God calls Avram. So the first 11 chapters, another story, but the first 11 chapters of Genesis are the introduction to the whole Torah. And then from Genesis 12 to the end of Deuteronomy is the main teaching of the Torah. And so what was the mitigation here? It's God's call to Abraham. And now when we come here, we see that it's from Abraham's seed. We have Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and then his children, the children of Israel, that wind up at Mount Sinai. Doesn't mean it because the children of Israel are any better than anybody else. Just means that we were called by God to receive the Torah at Mount Sinai. Nations can receive the Torah too if they want, but they're not required to keep all 613 mitzvot the same way that Jews are. And but by paralleling the ark here, just as Noah's ark saved mankind in the flood, so the ark here saves Moshe, who will be the Moshiach, the savior of the nation Israel. But I think it's even bigger than that, because the redemption of Israel is ultimately about the redemption of the whole world, bringing the whole world into connection with Hashem and his moral commandments that he wants all of us to keep. And so I think this is paralleling Noah's Ark for a good reason, not in the sense that, like the church in the Middle Ages often paralleled itself with Noah's Ark, just as if you weren't in the ark, you weren't saved. So if you're not in the church, you're not going to be saved and so on. No, not in that sense. Not, if you're not a Jew, you're not saved or something. Chas v'chalila, of course, we never teach that. But the ultimate redemption will come through the people of Israel and bringing his Torah to the nations. And so at any rate, and she covers it, and she puts it in the suf. Now, in the suf, which is the reeds. Later on, God will do an incredible miracle at the Yam Suf, at the Sea of Reeds, where he will part it. But why does she put it in the middle of the reeds here?
I would think that's probably a way to keep some sort of control, knowing that it won't be carried away.
Yeah, I think that's it.
In
I think that's
any
it.
uncontrolled manner. I mean, the
Yeah,
Nile could have gone
it's so
anywhere.
that these uh, reeds in the Nile will keep it from floating downstream and being
Right.
completely lost. Now, boy, this was this certainly took faith to do this. Now, it's been pointed out that this wasn't the only time when a baby was abandoned and then something else happened. You had, for example, Sargon of Akkad's birth.
Right.
He's told in Akkadian literature. Similarly, his parents put him in a basket and floated down the Euphrates, and he was rescued and raised and rose up to greatness. Some have tried to cast doubt on the historicity of the passage because of that, but I suspect that that was probably a common way then of leaving a baby to the forces of nature or the forces of God to deal with them as he would. Kind of like in the 19th century and before in Europe, it wasn't uncommon for a poor family who just realized they were not going to be able to raise this baby and feed him properly and everything else, would often leave the baby on the doorstep of a wealthy family because, just kind of throwing it on the mercy of God and this family that maybe they will raise the baby and give him a better chance than he would have with them. And I think, for example, I myself was adopted. And I thank God for that and saved my life. And I've always believed that the hand of God was in that. And so, well, there are a lot of kids that were adopted, and the hand of God was on them too. So one story doesn't negate any other in my thinking. It just means the common way of that happening. All right, but looking at the language here and the parallels tells me it's deliberately knows the story of Noah's Ark, and it's deliberately written this way because it wants you to see Moshe as a new Noah.
Right.
And yes. So okay, let's continue.
And the beauty of it, what I find beautiful in it's one verse, and it points backward to Noah's Ark, and it points, as you already said, it points forward through the reeds to the proof to what God is going to do, the larger miracle, and in one verse, and it looks both ways.
Yeah,
beautiful.
Very good point. Very good point. So let's go ahead. Why don't you read verse 5?
Yeah, because well, maybe I'm not sure if I read 4. And his sister stationed herself at a distance to learn what would befall him.
Yeah.
The daughter of You want to comment on that? I just pause briefly, and then when you start to comment, then I stop, and otherwise I just continue. All right?
Yeah.
Okay. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe in the Nile, while her maidens walked along the Nile. She spied the basket among the reeds and sent her slave girl to fetch it.
Yeah, okay, so let's stop right there just a minute. Let me see, just a minute. I just wanted to see if I'm getting messages from somebody, because I know we were supposed to have other people here tonight, but I'm not sure. But at any rate, okay. Yeah, now, so they're walking alongside the Nile, and she goes down to bathe. Ali Hayaor, it says. It's probably better translated beside the Nile. And So presumably, I mean, this is a princess. It's a daughter of Pharaoh. She is going to have a place beside there, perhaps some kind of a tub that's been placed there, or they dug out a pool or something beside the Nile. But she's probably not going to bathe directly in the Nile, so that, no danger of Nile crocodiles or anything coming up. And so the daughters are walking along the Nile, probably patrolling, making sure everything is okay. And that's when her servants, rather, servant girls, that's when they spot this basket, this ark. Okay. And so, okay, so go ahead then in verse 6.
When she opened it, she saw that it was a child, a boy crying. She took pity on it and said, "This must be a Hebrew child."
Yes.
Then his,
Yes. So, and by the way, in Hebrew it says V'nei Na'a, which is interesting. Because Na'a is normally like a young man of marriageable age that's not yet married. But here you have other examples of this in the Bible as well. It's it's a boy and he's crying, and she had pity on him and says, "Oh, this is one of the Hebrew kid babies." And now it's interesting. We're told that he was Tov. And can you imagine if he'd been an ugly baby? Maybe she'd thrown him back in the Nile. But here, everything works out.
Yeah.
Because it's not just about Moshe, even. It's about the whole nation. And ultimately, I would say the whole world. And okay. So, yeah, go ahead with the next verse.
7. Yeah. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get you a Hebrew nurse to suckle the child for you?"
Yeah. And so she's not saying, "Hey, that's my brother." No, of course not, because then it's obvious this is a setup. So it's, "Oh, hey, you want me to get it?" Now, it might be, because it's not really popular to be a Hebrew here, and that would make sense if this is after Achmos's expulsion of the
Hyksos.
Of the Hyksos, right? Then it would make sense. Maybe she wouldn't even want to, an Egyptian to wet nurse this kid because, he's a Hebrew.
Right.
And so it makes sense that, okay, we'll have one of these Hebrew midwife or Hebrew wet nurses take care of that. So, yeah, okay, glad you're here. Go do it. And so go ahead.
And Pharaoh's daughter answered, "Yes." So the girl went and called the child's mother.
Yeah, and the whole thing, she doesn't realize it's the kid's mother.
Right.
And yeah, and go ahead.
Now I was just thinking now. The first time it strikes me actually that we read these stories and we read them over and over again, but I can only now imagine the joy of the mother. I mean, she must have been really, really worried. I mean, you drop your little baby child in a basket in the River Nile. You tell your young daughter to keep an eye on him, and then things work out in this way. I mean, you must be just the joy of things working out. And that's actually a beautiful lesson that also for us to never give up hope.
Yeah, for sure.
Things may work out in a way that we just no idea.
Yeah.
And if they don't, then I honestly believe that we may still find out later on that they did work out somehow.
Yeah, yeah.
We really have to trust, and I'm talking to myself here. I have to trust more.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's the hand of the Lord. You know, like in reading the Tagebuch of Anna Frank,
Right.
you know, recently I reread it, and it really struck me that, gosh, she was so close, just a few months away from the camp being liberated.
I have read later testimonies of people who actually met her in the camp, where she died under horrible circumstances. But it's a good example. I mean, and not. I mean, it's an absolute tragedy, and I can only imagine what a young girl must have gone through. I mean, how old was she when I believe 15 or so. She wrote this diary. She must have been desperate, and she died under horrible circumstances, never knowing what would come of her diary. I mean, she has become an icon of. I mean, she is the person, the name that everybody knows. If we talk about a person that becomes like an iconic figure to represent all the Jews and the Jewish suffering. It's just absolutely amazing. And she never knew.
Yeah. And she said in there she wanted to be a writer someday and all that.
Right.
She had no idea she'd become world famous. And somebody told her father, you know, your daughter's diary is done more for education about the Holocaust than all of Nuremberg trials did. And so, you know, and that's a good example. That was the Goal. And now I believe she knows.
Yeah. I like to believe that as well. Actually, I was just thinking that when I said she never knew, and then immediately thought, but she knows now.
I think so.
Yeah.
So,
all right. But it was all for, after all. Wow.
Sure. A lot of things I could say about the language here, but I'm going to refrain from it. But I will just point out in verse 9, it says, "Ani eten et sacharech," and I will give your wage. And, you know, the first person pronoun I is redundant here. It's added to emphasize it's the daughter of Pharaoh that will provide the wage of the wet nurse. So now look at this. Not only does her son get to live, but she's going to get paid to take care of him.
Yeah.
Which is pretty incredible. And at least going by a later period, this is what the Midrash says, that she nursed him till for like the first 3 years of his life.
Right.
And which was typical for the time period. And so, all right, so let's go ahead then in verse 10.
"And when the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, who made him her son. She named him Moshe, explaining, I drew him out of the water."
Yeah, now, this is very interesting. Okay, Mishitihu, Minamayim Mishitihu, from the water, I drew him. Masha is the common verb in Hebrew meaning to draw out, right? But this word, Moshe, is a very common Egyptian word meaning to give birth. So Ramses, we're familiar with, Techut Moshe, all of those. Techut is gives birth, or Ra has given birth, all these Egyptian deities. So 2 things I'd like to say about that. Number 1, did Pharaoh's daughter know Egyptian? I'm sorry. Yeah, I assume she knew Egyptian. Did she know Hebrew is what I want to say.
But the interesting thing is, it's her words here. She said, "I drew him out of the water." So she seems to, at least to hint at that meaning. But I personally don't see that as necessarily the case that she knew the language. She gave that name, and in God's providence, that just came all together in one language and the other. And now in the scripture that we're having, because I mean, we're reading her words in Hebrew. I don't think that she actually spoke these words in Hebrew.
No. Now, Hebrew is related to Egyptian through a common Proto-Afro-Asiatic, but nonetheless, this is a case of a midrashic derivation of the name. And so the biblical writer sees a providence in what has happened here. And now, likely, there was some kind of divine name attached to this. You don't just name the kid because it gives birth. So maybe she named him the Nile has given birth. And that would make sense. But Moshe has certainly dropped the pagan deity's name from his name.
Right.
And that's the best I can make of this. And so, but just to point out, but at the same time, the biblical writer sees, you mean it one way, but God means it another.
Right.
You meant it for evil, Joseph told his brothers, but God meant it for good. Pharaoh's daughter named him Moshe for one reason, but God meant it for something else. So he was drawn out of water, and water is going to come up in his story. We're going to see this come up again and again and again in Moshe's life and in the narrative here. So, okay, so let's continue from here then.
Sometime after that, when Moses had grown up, he went out to his kinsfolk and witnessed their labors. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his kinsmen.
Yeah, now we're told so little about this. And, we would like to have a lot more detail. But now, a possible, what fits with the chronology, like some conservative scholars have worked this out, Queen Hatshepsut could well be the candidate here. And Doug Petrovich has done a possible reconstruction of how this might have worked out. Now, we don't know. Maybe it's a lesser daughter to a minor concubine. I have no idea. But it could well have been somebody like Queen Hatshepsut as well. And but at any rate, surely he is now going to grow up, as with all of the best of the wisdom of the Egyptians at his feet, growing up in royalty. And then one day he goes out to his brothers. So, apparently his mother told him that he's actually a Hebrew. So now he's curious. And, adopted children are naturally curious. I was. And I had to contact my biological parents when I grew up. And after a long search, I actually did find them. And but it's natural. Children do that. They want to find who their biological parents were.
Right.
It's just a natural thing. But he chooses not just to go out, okay, now I see who they are. And then he goes back and, wow, thank you, Mom, for saving me from all of that. Instead, for whatever reason, his nephesh, his soul is attracted to these slaves.
Yeah.
Why he would do that, doesn't make human sense. You've got everything in front of you. Just, thank God or thank Ra or whatever deity you want and go back and, the royal family that have adopted you and be happy. But he, for whatever reason, he can't do that. And we say, oftentimes you'll have somebody that, they weren't born Jewish halachically, but often they're what we call Zera Yisrael. It's somebody in their family, was Jewish generations ago, and they've assimilated a long time ago. And yet they're attracted to Israel. And I've seen it happen here. They couldn't figure out why they were so attracted to Israel and Jews and all of that. And they come to this country, and then they do some research. They come to find out that, oh my gosh, look, and they can actually trace their ancestry back a few generations ago. We were part of the Anocene in Spain, and or things like this, or just somebody assimilated out a few generations ago, and they had no idea before. And I have seen a number of Olim here that have come from former Soviet Union, that they became very interested in Israel. They wanted to come here, they wanted to visit, all of that. And then somebody, often a grandmother, sometimes a mother, would pull them and say, why are you so interested in these Jews? And I'm like, I don't know, I think they're interesting people. Well, we are Jews. And you're kidding. Why didn't you tell me? Because look, we survived the Holocaust.
Right.
And everybody hates Jews. And we didn't want you to have to suffer the way we did. So we didn't tell you anything about it. And often they get upset at their parents and whatever. And but why was their nephesh so attracted to Israel from before? And often it can be generations. It lay latent. And then it comes to the fore. And doesn't matter the circumstances or whatever. And I've seen people, like this Hungarian couple right now. They're really great people. And they were so interested in Israel and studied Torah with me for, several, I think a couple of years actually. And at first it was just about how to be B'nai Noachites. But in the end, they wanted to convert. And, we're not evangelizing anybody. But, if they press and they really want to and they're crazy enough, then, well, okay. And so they went through this whole long, difficult process and actually finished their conversion. They're getting ready to make Aliyah to Israel. And, they've got good jobs. They own real estate, a couple pieces of land, all of this in Hungary. My gosh, why would you give all that up to come and live in Israel? Are you guys crazy? And I try to talk them out of it.
Yeah.
But when it's in their nefesh, and I even came and volunteered and helped me build the shed and whatever while rockets are coming down on us. And so there are things that you can't explain. And this is one of those humanly you can't explain. Why would Moshe want to do this? Are you crazy?
Well, no, absolutely. In 100%, there is something inside Moshe's nefesh that, but I do also think that it. I mean, I sometimes wonder if the Pharaoh's daughter gets enough credit. I mean, because she adopted the boy. That's already quite a thing if you're Pharaoh's daughter. From a Hebrew boy, which they were slaves. There's not many people who would do that. Probably she then allowed for a Hebrew woman to nurse him, and she even paid for it. So she must have. I honestly think. I'm just thinking that now, but I honestly think that she must have somehow told him, and maybe she felt something special. And but wasn't it you who said that? Because this is another one. We don't know her name. But I thought there is in the Bible a reference to a name that could be identified. Didn't you not tell that?
What's that?
That there's a name, and I have to look it up. If it was not you, I read and hear so much.
Okay.
There is in the Bible mention of a name of a woman who is honored in the Bible, actually, and that the sages say, well, that was the daughter of Pharaoh.
Oh, yeah, it's a midrash, yeah.
But what was that again? I forgot.
But as I recall, the dates.
Okay, let it go. Otherwise, next week we will remember. We come back to it.
But that's okay. But the dates don't work out.
I would have to look it up again as well. But we'll look it up. We'll talk about it next week.
Okay. It's like, the sages identify Nimrod with Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon and so on. They're very different time periods, and that can't work out and so on. Midrash teaches important spiritual lessons.
Right.
But as the Rambam said, only a fool would take it at face value. But okay. But at any rate.
Let's go.
So go ahead.
Okay, he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his kinsmen. He turned this way and that, and seeing no one about, he struck down the Egyptian and hit him in the sand.
Yes. Okay.
Which always, always reminds me. Those really were different times. If we would see a thing like this, I would possibly interfere, but I would not strike the other guy dead. I'm always amazed about in Torah how much provision there is for if you incidentally kill someone. Well, I never killed someone by accident. But in those days, things just happened apparently, and they were so different. And here as well, history.
Yeah. Now, look. Now, also notice. He sees someone smiting a Hebrew from his brothers.
Yeah.
And meaning, he identifies with him. That's mishpacha. Jews all over the world, we run into another Jew. It's, anachnu mishpacha. It's just a thing. And, I remember walking down the street with a Sudanese refugee that we were working with before. And as we were walking down the sidewalk, another black person passed us, not Sudanese, just a black guy, tourist, and my Sudanese friend, hey, They spoke to each other and we walked past. And I said, "Oh, you know him?" And he said, "No, never saw him before in his life." It's like, "Why did you speak to him?" And he said, "Because that happens. It could be black person be anywhere in the world walking across the sidewalk. They see another black person, they'll say, 'Hey.'" And I said, "Oh, that's very interesting." It's like this tribal mentality that we have in Judaism as well.
Yeah.
And a lot of non-Jews will get offended when they see that, but it's just that we are mishpacha. I don't know how it is in Holland. You would probably, if you run into a Dutchman you're abroad and you run into another Dutchman, you would probably identify with him. I know when I was in Japan, I remember just meeting into another white face on the street, and we started talking and we became friends. We had nothing in common. In America, we would never meet in the first place, and if we did, we wouldn't give it a second thought. But in Japan, we had something in common. We were not Japanese from the same country. And is it like that with?
Well, I think so. I think it is very common between people who speak the same language, that you identify. If I hear in the streets, if I hear Dutch being spoken, I don't say that because there's so many that I will always approach them, but it is sort of immediately you identify. A stupid thing when I'm driving a car here and I see a Dutch number plate, I say, "Hey." Yeah, and it is stronger than you think. This
okay. So
identification with people of
this,
but tribal mentality. I mean, we are tribal people, all of us.
Yeah, but what causes him to so identify with these slaves? He looks around to make sure nobody's watching, and he fights and defends and delivers the Hebrew slave from the Egyptian. Now that is amazing. This is also showing.
It already says a lot about his character. I think people who and of course in his case it was stronger because I do believe that there was the attraction to the people that he really belonged to, but also the fact that he identifies and takes it up for the downtrodden, the slaves, the people, the underprivileged, to put it.
Yes.
So I think it's a lot about Moshe as well.
Yeah,
that he does that.
Right.
He does not identify with the oppressor.
Yeah. And even though he has every right to. And so there's something about Moshe's character that we're going to see then. It's like this is preparation for God's ultimate calling of Moshe to deliver the people. What he does here in this chapter is what he'll be doing for the rest of his life.
Right.
That will be his life's calling. He doesn't know it yet. And so he
and also when you look at the next verse, I will read it first.
Okay.
When he went out the next day, he found two Hebrews fighting. So he said to the offender, "Why do you strike your fellow?" So there was on the one hand the identification and protection of his fellow Hebrew that he identified with, but also between the Hebrews, he had just a strong sense of justice. And why are you striking your fellow?
Yeah. Now, the first place, after the first incident, he doesn't just run back to the palace and say, "Wow, I better lie low."
Right.
He goes out again. He just can't get away from these Hebrew slaves. So, and as you said before, it's like, wait a minute now. What's the difference between my people and these Egyptians? Egyptians no better than my people. It doesn't give them the right to beat Hebrew slaves. So he goes out the next day, and now first he delivered Israel from Egypt, right? Now he goes out the next day to deliver Israel from Israel.
Right.
And as he's about to learn, that's the more difficult one.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because not only does he get no thanks for that, he gets an actual threat.
Right.
So, yeah. So go ahead.
Yeah. I'm even thinking now, and this just comes up now. He took Israel out of Egypt, but then he had to take Egypt out of Israel.
Yeah.
The Israelites.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
because I mean, I'm always amazed, and I think I've said this before. I've reflected a lot, on say the impact that 5 years of occupation under the Germans has made on the Netherlands. Like my parents lived through that occupation.
Yes.
My father was in one of those forced labor camps, right? As a youth. I mean, I was 24 years old, and he was put for more than a year. He was in Germany, and that has always colored all of our upbringing.
Why did they put him in a camp? What was that?
Because they needed labor. So all the Germans were fighting in the army, so they were just basically taking young people from all the nations that they occupied, and they put them into labor camps for forced labor, the Arbeitseinsatz, the Arbeitslager. So it was not an extermination camp, but it was a work.
Oh yeah,
camp.
forced labor camp, sure.
A forced labor camp, and of course there was not the threat like in the concentration camps, but circumstances were not much better.
The threat was still very real.
My father, when
there very easily.
He walked back from the camp. He walked back to his hometown, Rotterdam, and he weighed 50 kilos when he arrived. So I mean, he was my size. But what I want to say is this: I'm impressed because the past of what my parents went through in the war was something that was never spoken about. And you never asked about it either. It was just not done to ask about it, but it was always present. It was sort of, you knew about it. And I think if that was after 5 years, how much more so many generations who had lived under slavery, what does that do to a people? And then Moses has to take them out of that. Yes. And indeed prepare them for the promised land. And we know that the first generation failed. And for me, that is not surprising at all. Because it's not an easy thing to be taken out of slavery after so many generations, to go through a desert and then be given the responsibility to actually enter the land. I can identify. I can understand these people. Oh, wait a minute. Let's take it easy here. Anyway.
Yeah, and today we see it with galut. We say you can take the Jew out of the galut, out of the exile.
Right.
But it's much harder to take the galut out of the Jew.
Yes.
And in this country, we're still living with a galut mentality.
Yeah.
And, but what can I say? It's another subject. Yeah. So, all right. So now let's.
Okay, so
here, go ahead. Verse 14, I think.
Okay, so why do you strike your fellow? He retorted, who made you chief and ruler over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?
Yeah, okay. Now,
okay, let me finish. Moses was frightened and thought, then the matter is known.
Yes. Now this Sav Shofet, prince and ruler. Now this could be two different things, or it could be a hendiatus. That is an officer. Two ways describing the same thing, but it could be, both a prince and a judge. Okay, which is ironic because what will Moshe become?
Right.
Prince and a ruler, prince and a judge, Sav Shofet. Who made you? Well, we're about to find out, but it's the right idea. This smart aleck Hebrew slave speaks more than he knows.
Yeah.
But it's the right idea, but the wrong time. Moshe is not yet ready.
What strikes me now, he was indeed a prince and a ruler, Moshe. But if you had asked me what's the first thing that comes to mind when you say Moshe, then I think a servant of the Lord.
Uh-huh.
and you can only be a true prince and ruler if you are a servant of the Lord.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Now look here, are you going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian? Now behind this is a threat. Because, you give me a problem, I'll turn you in. So then he became afraid and said, uh-oh, it's become known. So go ahead, continue.
Yeah, and that is what you just said becomes clear from the next verse, because when Pharaoh learned of the matter, he sought to kill Moshe, but Moshe fled from Pharaoh. He arrived in the land of Midian and sat down beside a well.
Yes. Okay.
And
now Pharaoh seeks to kill him, and he sets down. He is okay. Now look, in Hebrew, it's Vayeshev be'eretz Midian, Vayeshev ala be'er. So it's a kind of poetic thing. He dwelt in the land of Midian. He sat down by a well. It's two different usages of the same verb. The first one means to dwell. Second time it means to sit. But in Hebrew, it's the same verb. It's a kind of poetic parallelism here. Now, so if somebody's listening to this and hasn't yet studied Hebrew, you're going to want to start because it's beautiful language and it opens up a lot of stuff. But, okay, now look at this. What I think is cool is I don't know if you like to watch old Westerns. I love those old cowboy movies. And thankfully, so does my wife. And, in all of them, okay, you got your hero and he's going to have a lightning fast, quick draw. I mean, that's a motif that's in all of them. So that's going to happen. But okay, what's going to make it interesting is you have to have some variables in there to make it interesting. So if our hero with a lightning fast quick draw is now in a barber's chair in the middle of getting a shave, and now not one but three bad guys walk in and catch him unawares. Now how is he going to do it? And he still outdraws and shoots them all, dispatches the bad guys. This happened with Clint Eastwood in the High Plains Drifter, right? I think that was the movie. And okay, so that, it put a little different slant on it. Or maybe the hero is just, we don't even know that he's a quick draw gunfighter. He just goes into town with these farmers that he hired himself out to and just walks in a saloon and he gets bullied by some other guys and he doesn't even want to defend himself. And we discover that he's really a meat guy that's trying to get away from all this killing. But the circumstances won't let him. So then all of a sudden we discover our meat guy, when the need is there, suddenly can put on his irons and outdraw the best of them, as happened in Shane, which is one of my all-time favorite movies from the 1950s. And, in other words, in all of these movies, we know you're going to have a quick draw good guy, and the bad guys are going to put him in some crazy situations. And the variable will be something else.
Hmm.
And the variable that comes up will tell us something about the character of the guy.
Hmm.
Is he meek, humble, like in Shane? Is he, so deadly and unpredictable, like Clint Eastwood? We'll learn something about the guy. Now, why am I telling you about Westerns? Because I want to introduce you to the concept of a literary type scene, which is what we have here. Moshe goes to sit down by a well. And then some ladies come to a well. Is this the first time we've had that show up in the Torah?
No.
Where else do we see that?
The first one that comes to mind, that was what's his name, Eliezer, the servant of Abraham,
Yeah.
who goes to look for a wife for Isaac.
Yeah, that's the first.
That was the first, I believe. Jacob, when
Jacob.
he went there and he sat at a well.
All right. And then we have Moshe here.
Okay.
And so with the first one, with Eliezer, he makes this long prayer and about if she offers me water and also for my camels, which is a heck of a lot of work. To draw a bucket up and here, fill your wineskin, that's one thing. To draw all this water and fill these troughs to fill all these thirsty camels?
Right.
You got to be kidding. So it tells us something about he is wanting a sign from God that this is the right woman for his master's son. And he gets the sign, but we also learn something about the character of Rivka.
Right.
And wow, that she is, she's not afraid of hard work and all of that and so on. We look at Yaakov. There's an obstacle there with Yaakov. Do you remember what the obstacle was?
I can't really think of them.
There's a stone over the mouth of the well.
Right, of course.
And they would wait till all the shepherds would gather together, and then they would all move the stone and water the flocks at once. And Yaakov is like, what's the big deal? And so he moves the stone.
Right.
So he was not a wimp. I mean, he had to have been, he had to have been kind of beefy there to be able to move that stone himself. And we see stones show up in Yaakov's life in many places. So, for example, he has the dream of the ladder, and he sets up a stone first as a pillow for himself. And then after the dream, when he wakes up in the morning, he creates stacks up a stack of stones, and or from the stack that he did for his head, he makes a matzevah to the Lord and pours expensive oil on it and makes a vow to the Lord. And then when he comes back from Haran and makes this treaty with his father-in-law, Lavan, he sets up a heap of stones as a witness. So stones show up often in Yaakov, and it's like something about his hard character and moving obstacles away to to make things happen. Now, here with Moshe, we're going to learn something about Moshe's character as well when we see what are the specifics. And so, okay, go ahead and
all right. Now, the priest of Midian had 7 daughters. They came to draw water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. But shepherds came and drove them off. And Moses rose to their defense, and he watered their flock.
Okay. All right. So now what's going on here?
Well, I see actually again Moshe acting in defense of people who are in need of help.
He is he's fighting for justice.
Right.
The original social justice warrior, before that word got all twisted and given completely new meaning by the neo-Marxists, he is very concerned about injustice in the world.
Right.
And so he drives them away. He rises up. And look at this, Vayoshi'an. And so he delivers them from the Shoresh Yud Shin Ayin as a Moshiach, as a savior or a deliverer, which is exactly what he's going to become for the whole nation. Yeah. So this is part of the preparation of Moshe. So right idea, but not yet the time to do it for the whole nation. And then he waters their flock, which is what he's going to do with the flock of God very shortly. All right. So let's continue.
When they returned to their father Reuel, he said, "How is it that you have come back so soon today?" And they answered, "An Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock." He said to his daughter, okay, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. He said to his daughters, "Where is he then? Why did you leave the man? Ask him in to break bread."
So now this is Middle Eastern hospitality at its finest. And that is complete stranger. With the law of the desert, you welcome strangers in. As a Bedouin have told me, everybody has the right to come, stay with you, whatever, 3 days, no questions asked. After that, okay, who are you, where are you coming from, what are you doing, whatever. But it's part of hospitality here. So come in, let's eat food, And so go ahead.
Yeah, and I like, and of course it is, but it is so different. I mean, it's not that they just share bread, maybe pre-cut or anything. No, you break bread because, and for me that is a very intimate gesture. You break bread, and then you share it. You give it to the other.
Yeah, and of course this is a kind of pas pro toto, part for the whole. That is,
of course,
bread stands for the whole meal.
Absolutely.
Bread is actually the knife, fork, and spoon in this part of the world.
Yeah.
But it stands for the whole meal. It's obviously more than just bread here, but yeah. And so, and in fact, lechem in Hebrew, do you remember what lahim in Arabic is?
That's bread, right? Or no, that was
meat.
Meat.
In Arabic,
meat. No, you remember, Bet lechem,
bread,
house of bread, a house of meat.
Yeah, so it's the main food of an agrarian society is bread. Like Canaanite, the main food of a nomadic society, like the Arab society originally was, is meat. So, okay, so go ahead.
Moses consented to stay with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah as wife.
Yes.
She bore a son who he named Gershom, for he said, "I have been a stranger in a foreign land."
Yes. So it's really interesting. So every time he calls the kid by name, Gershom, he will be reminded where he came from and the circumstances when this happened. But at the same time, he's a stranger in a strange land. and as God has provided him a wife and a new family now. But he's cut himself off from Egypt because of his choosing to identify with these Hebrew slaves, and now God gives him another family.
Right.
And so, okay, and this is
the other thing that I find interesting, and I'm reading here a comment from I'm reading from the Jewish Study Bible.
Okay.
And I thought this was interesting because I had not seen it before. I only saw it when I opened it this evening, and I saw it. It says here, since Moses was raised as an Egyptian, it is only in Midian that he really begins to feel the sense of alienness that his kinsfolk have experienced in Egypt.
Oh, thank you. Yeah,
I thought that was
very
really
good.
interesting. Because in Egypt, he must have felt somewhat of divided because, he identified with the Jews and the slaves. But on the other hand, he was raised an Egyptian. So it was not entirely foreign to him. He was sort of in between cultures. Now he's a foreigner, a stranger.
Yeah, notice, by the way, how she introduces him to her father. Oh, this Egyptian delivered me. So apparently the way he dresses, the way he speaks, he's an Egyptian.
In Egypt, he was not completely foreigner. I mean, he may have felt attracted to the Jews, but he was raised as an
Egyptian.
But now
he was Egyptian.
Now he learns what it is to be a stranger in a foreign land. Yeah, and that is also necessary to later understand what his own people had been going through for so many years.
Yes.
I mean, you've said it before that in a sense, the Jewish people are still in exile. Not in the spiritual way, but in a physical way. I mean, I've been living all over the place in the world, everywhere except Netherlands, where I was born almost. Well, that's where I've not lived most of the time. So I know what it means to be a foreigner or a stranger in a foreign land. And it's not easy.
Yes.
And I've always lived in wonderful countries. I live in Brazil, and now I stay in Italy. I mean, those are wonderful countries. And yet, I am a stranger in a foreign land.
Yes, yes.
And I can understand what Moses here was going through. And what the people in Egypt had gone through. Yes. And that Moses needed to experience to even further identify with it.
Right.
I think that really is very significant.
Yes, I think so too. And this is powerful. It's one of my favorite passages, one of my favorite books, and it still never ceases to baffle me.
No.
All that Moshe had going for himself.
Yeah.
And why does he choose to identify with these slaves, for crying out loud? And it looks like he's ruined his life. But of course, this is all part of Hashem's plan for him and for a nation. I would argue for the whole world. And what's interesting is, I think because I was adopted, I never quite felt fully at home anywhere I ever was.
There you go.
Until I came to Israel. Right. In Israel, I felt the most at home from the first time I was here in 1983. I knew that, wow, I belong here.
Yeah, the sense of belonging.
And it's no small price that I have paid to live here as well. And, but I wouldn't live anywhere else. And my wife feels the same. And thank God I met her here. And at any rate, this is one of my favorite passages. I would like to upload this to YouTube if I could have your permission to do that.
Sure.
And all right. I think it might let other people know what we have going here, and we might get some other people signing up for the course.
Sure. Yeah. A very personal one, though, this tonight. I mean, we talked a lot about our own experience as well, but I'm fine with that.
Yeah. Yeah, actually it was. That's why I wanted to make sure I asked you for permission before
sure.
I did this.
Yeah. Sure.
And, so, all right, but I think it's good stuff.
I think it's a good point to stop, and we continue next week. All right.
All right. Thanks a lot, bro. Appreciate it. See you next week.